At 5:30 a.m. on May 25, 1985, Joanne Snyder kissed her husband Melvin goodbye as she left for her job baking pies at the local diner. Through her rearview mirror, she watched him wave from their barn, hammer in hand, ready to tackle another day of farm work. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. When she returned home 7 hours later, around 12:30 p.m., something felt immediately wrong. Melvin's pickup truck was gone. That wasn't necessarily unusual. He often ran errands or drove into town for supplies. But his tools were scattered across the workbench in complete disarray. And that was very unusual. Melvin Snyder was a man whose precision bordered on obsession. He never, ever left his tools lying around. Every wrench had its place. Every hammer hung exactly where it belonged. The sight filled Joanne with ice-cold dread. She walked deeper into the barn, calling her husband's name. The silence that answered her was deafening. Then sunlight caught something on the concrete floor that made her blood stop. A tiny brass object, no bigger than a lipstick tube, glinted in the shadows. She bent down to look closer. It was a shell casing, .25 caliber, small but deadly. Someone had fired a gun in this barn, and Melvin was nowhere to be found. Here's where the story gets strange. Joanne didn't immediately call the police. She waited. For 2 full days, she stared at empty driveways, jumped at every phone ring, prayed for headlights that never came. Why would someone wait 2 days to report their husband missing after finding a shell casing in their barn? That question would haunt investigators for years. But on May 27, 1985, Joanne finally filed a missing person report with the Pennsylvania State Police. By then, detectives had already found something disturbing. Detective Bill Thompson caught the case. A missing farmer, a shell casing, and now, an abandoned vehicle. Melvin's pickup truck had been found 60 miles away in a grocery store parking lot in Reisterstown, Maryland. Thompson drove to Maryland to examine the truck himself. What he found didn't make sense. The keys dangled in the ignition. The windows were cracked open as if someone had just stepped out to grab milk and would be right back. On the passenger seat sat Melvin's checkbook, untouched. In the gun rack mounted in the rear window, a loaded rifle remained undisturbed. If Melvin had voluntarily left his life behind, why would he leave his money and his weapon? And here's the detail that really bothered Thompson. The radio was tuned to a rock station. Everyone who knew Melvin Snyder knew one thing about him. He absolutely despised rock music. He was old school country all the way. He would never, under any circumstances, tune his radio to rock. Someone else had been driving that truck. Thompson examined the truck bed carefully. Fresh gouges scarred the metal. Deep scratches that hadn't been there before, according to Joanne. Someone had loaded something heavy into that truck bed, something that scraped and dragged as they hauled it in. The truck had been wiped clean of fingerprints. Not a single print anywhere inside the vehicle. That wasn't an accident. That was intentional. Detective Thompson knew he wasn't looking for a missing person anymore. He was looking for a body. As Thompson dug into Melvin's background, he uncovered a scandal that would explain everything. Exactly 1 year earlier, May 1984, Melvin Snyder and a woman named Teresa Harshman had met at square dancing lessons. Square dancing. Think about that for a second. What could be more innocent and wholesome than square dancing? But sometimes, when the caller shouts, "Change partners," people take it a little too literally. Melvin was married to Joanne. Teresa was married to Ron Harshman. Both couples had seemed happy enough on the surface. But during those square dance evenings, something sparked between Melvin and Teresa. They started meeting in secret. Coffee turned into longer conversations. Conversations turned into something more. In June 1984, Teresa told her husband Ron about the affair. She and Melvin were leaving, fleeing to Montana together to start fresh, nearly 1,800 miles away from their Pennsylvania lives. Ron Harshman did not take this news well. On the day Teresa was supposed to leave, Melvin arrived at the Harshman house to pick her up. Ron came storming out of the house in a rage. He got in his pickup truck, deliberately rammed it into Melvin's vehicle, then jumped out with a gun blazing. He fired 2 shots at Melvin. Both missed by inches. Melvin, drowning in guilt over the affair, refused to press charges. He just wanted to get Teresa and get out of Pennsylvania. That mercy, that misguided decision not to have Ron arrested, would cost Melvin everything. The lovers fled to Billings, Montana. For 3 weeks, they tried to build a new life together, 1,800 miles from the wreckage they'd left behind. But back in Pennsylvania, the 2 abandoned spouses, Joanne and Ron, found comfort in each other's arms. According to court documents and witness testimony, they began their own affair while their spouses were gone. The betrayed become the betrayers. It's the kind of messy situation that only happens in small-town America. After 3 weeks in Montana, reality set in for Melvin and Teresa. According to later court testimony, Melvin told friends he feared something horrible would happen if they didn't return to Pennsylvania. The guilt was eating them alive. They came back, moved back in with their original spouses, and tried to put the pieces back together. The Snyders' reconciliation worked. Joanne's heart proved big enough for forgiveness. Their marriage, while damaged, seemed to be healing. The Harshmans' reconciliation? Not so much. Teresa eventually served Ron with divorce papers and moved away. That divorce became final months before Melvin vanished. Ron Harshman's forgiveness had razor-sharp limits, and his rage had a long, patient memory. As Thompson investigated, witness statements started painting a disturbing picture. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, remembered seeing a 2-tone brown pickup truck parked near the Snyder property on the morning of May 25, 1985. She'd been driving past around 6:45 a.m. when she noticed the unfamiliar vehicle. The truck matched the description of Ron Harshman's vehicle perfectly. A distinctive 2-tone brown Ford that stood out in the rural Pennsylvania landscape. The timing was chilling, right around the window when Melvin disappeared. Mrs. Atitas Henderson told investigators she thought it was odd at the time because the Snyders didn't usually have visitors that early in the morning. She'd seen the same truck at Ron Harshman's house before, so she recognized it immediately. But she hadn't thought much of it until Melvin went missing. Thompson dug deeper into Ron's activities in the weeks before Melvin vanished. The timeline was damning. In March 1985, just 3 days after Teresa served him with divorce papers, Ron walked into a gun shop and purchased a .25 caliber handgun. A Titan semi-automatic pistol, to be exact. The exact same caliber as the shell casing found in Melvin's barn. Think about that timing. 3 days after his wife formally ends their marriage, Ron buys a gun. 2 months later, the man who ran off with his wife vanishes. It doesn't take a detective to connect those dots. When Thompson confronted Ron about the weapon, Ron's story immediately fell apart. He claimed Teresa had taken the gun because she liked how it felt. It was a ridiculous excuse, and Thompson knew it the second the words left Ron's mouth. But when investigators questioned Teresa, she was adamant. She hated guns with every fiber of her being. She'd never touched a firearm in her life. She knew nothing about any weapon. The idea that she would take Ron's gun because she liked how it felt was absurd. Someone was lying. Thompson knew exactly who. What made Ron's lie even more transparent was this. When investigators searched his house, they found boxes of .25 caliber ammunition sitting in a drawer. If Teresa had taken his gun, why would Ron keep the ammunition for it? You don't buy bullets for a gun you don't have anymore. When investigators searched Ron's house, they found boxes of .25 caliber ammunition, but no gun. Ron claimed he didn't know where the weapon had gone. It had just disappeared, right around the time Melvin disappeared. Thompson uncovered another disturbing detail. In the week before Melvin vanished, Joanne and Ron had exchanged multiple phone calls. Both insisted they were just friends, consoling each other through their respective marital troubles. But the timing felt orchestrated. The explanations sounded rehearsed. During interrogations, Ron's demeanor shifted whenever Melvin's name entered the conversation. His hands would clench into fists. His jaw would tighten. Thompson recognized the body language of a man whose pride had been shattered beyond repair. Teresa crumbled under questioning. She described Ron's escalating obsession with revenge in the months after they'd returned from Montana. He spoke constantly about making Melvin pay for what he'd done. He plotted scenarios where justice would be served. Teresa feared for her own safety during those dark months, which is why she finally filed for divorce. Friends of Melvin's came forward with even more troubling information. Before his disappearance, Melvin had confided that Ron still burned with fury. Melvin sensed danger in every shadow. He'd even updated his will, as if he knew something bad was coming. He'd said his goodbyes without using those exact words. Melvin Snyder had predicted his own doom with chilling accuracy. As Thompson pieced together the timeline, he realized this wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, premeditated. Ron had studied Melvin's routines. He knew exactly when Joanne left for work every morning. He understood the property layout intimately. After all, he'd been there before during his affair with Joanne. Thompson developed a theory. Ron had driven to the Snyder farm on the morning of May 25, 1985. He'd found Melvin alone in the barn, just like Joanne had told him he would be. He'd confronted Melvin, pulled out his .25 caliber pistol, and eliminated him. The small caliber bullet likely remained lodged in Melvin's body, which meant Ron needed to dispose of the corpse. He'd probably loaded Melvin's body into Melvin's own truck, creating those mysterious scratches in the truck bed. He'd driven the body somewhere and buried it or hidden it so well that it would never be found. Then he'd returned to the Snyder property on his motorcycle, loaded the bike into Melvin's truck, driven 60 miles to Maryland, abandoned the vehicle, and ridden his motorcycle home through Pennsylvania's back roads. He thought he'd committed the perfect crime. But Thompson had all the pieces. He just couldn't prove it. No body, no weapon, no witnesses. Just circumstances that would never hold up in court. The case went cold. Detective Bill Thompson never gave up on Melvin Snyder. For 15 years, the case haunted him. He'd drive past the Snyder farm and imagine what happened in that barn. He'd see Ron Harshman around town and feel his blood boil, knowing the truth but being unable to prove it. In 1993, Joanne had Melvin legally declared gone. She remarried and became Joan Snyder Hall. Life moved on for everyone except Melvin, who lay in some unmarked grave, and Thompson, who couldn't let the case rest. Then in 1995, 15 years after Melvin vanished, Ron Harshman demanded a confrontational meeting with police. He wanted them to stop what he called harassment. Thompson agreed to the meeting, curious what Ron would say. During that tense encounter, Ron's mask slipped completely. His sociable facade gave way to cold fury as he demanded Thompson cease the investigation. There was nothing to investigate, Ron insisted. Melvin had run off somewhere, started a new life. Thompson challenged him. If you're innocent, take a polygraph test. Ron's refusal spoke volumes in the deafening silence that followed. In 1999, a prosecutor named Jack Nelson inherited the frozen case file. Nelson was young, ambitious, and haunted by the injustice of unsolved cases. He couldn't sleep knowing that Ron Harshman was walking free. He read through every page of Thompson's investigation, hundreds of pages of witness statements, forensic reports, interview transcripts. And one detail caught his attention. Ron Harshman had purchased that .25 caliber pistol in March 1985. Nelson kept coming back to one question. Wouldn't a responsible gun owner test-fire a new weapon? Wouldn't he take it to his backyard and shoot a few rounds into the ground? Just to make sure it worked properly? Just to get a feel for how it handled? And if he did, wouldn't those shell casings still be buried in the Pennsylvania soil on his former property? It was a long shot. A really long shot. 15 years had passed. The Harshmans no longer lived at that property. New owners had moved in. The property had probably been walked over, driven over, plowed, and worked thousands of times in the intervening years. But Nelson couldn't shake the idea. He started researching metal detection technology. He learned that Civil War enthusiasts regularly found artifacts that had been buried for over 100 years. If metal detectors could find mini-balls and belt buckles from the 1860s, surely they could find shell casings from the 1980s. Nelson reached out to metal detecting enthusiasts from Gettysburg, serious hobbyists who spent their weekends combing old battlefields for historical artifacts. He explained the case and asked if they'd be willing to search the Harshmans' former property for something much more recent, evidence of a modern ending. Don Hinks, owner of Gettysburg Electronics and a legend in the metal detecting community, agreed to lead the expedition. Hinks had found countless Civil War relics over the years. Now he'd be searching for evidence that could solve a case that had haunted Pennsylvania law enforcement for over a decade. In July 1999, 14 years after Melvin vanished, Hinks and his team descended on Ron Harshman's old property at 4230 Buchanan Trail West in Greencastle with their equipment. The new property owners had given permission for the search. They wanted justice for Melvin, too. The property covered hundreds of acres of Pennsylvania farmland. This wasn't like searching a bedroom or even a house. This was combing through decades of accumulated debris. Rural properties accumulate metal like magnets, tin foil from lunches, old farm equipment, rusty nails, broken tools, scraps from 100 different projects. The metal detectors would beep constantly, and 99% of those beeps would be false alarms. Hinks started his search methodically in the backyard near the house. If Ron had test-fired his gun, he probably wouldn't have walked far from his back door. People who test-fire weapons usually do it casually, stepping into their yard, pointing toward the ground, squeezing off a few rounds to hear how loud it is, to feel the recoil. The detector beeped. Hinks dug a bottle cap. The detector beeped again. An old horseshoe. Beep. A rusty nail. Beep. More bottle caps. Beep. A piece of farm equipment so rusted it crumbled when Hinks touched it. An hour passed. 2 hours. The team was getting discouraged. They'd found 130 years worth of metal garbage, but no shell casings. Maybe this was a waste of time. Maybe Ron had cleaned up after himself. Maybe he'd never test-fired the gun at all. 90 minutes into the search, Hinks moved near an old clothesline post in the backyard. His metal detector suddenly started screaming, not the usual beep. A sustained, high-pitched tone that indicated something substantial was buried right there. The signal was strong, consistent, about an inch below the surface. Hinks's pulse quickened. He got down on his knees and carefully began digging with a small trowel, sifting through the soil with the care of an archaeologist at a priceless dig site. Every grain of dirt mattered now. His gloved hand touched something small, cylindrical, metallic. He pulled it free and brushed off the dirt, hardly daring to breathe. A shell casing, .25 caliber. The brass had developed a patina from 15 years underground, a greenish tint that proved its age. But it was perfectly preserved, protected by the soil that had hidden it all these years. Hinks looked up at the other investigators who'd gathered around. Nobody spoke for a moment. They all understood what this meant. This tiny piece of brass, no bigger than a lipstick tube, was worth more than any Civil War relic Hinks had ever found. This was evidence. This was justice. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd found treasure more precious than gold. They'd found proof. At the Pennsylvania State Police Crime Lab, a firearms expert named Ernst Baltimore examined both shell casings under powerful microscopes. The one from Melvin's barn, the one from Ron's backyard. Every gun leaves unique signatures on ejected shells, microscopic fingerprints made of metal. When a gun fires, the explosion forces the shell casing against the firing chamber walls, the extractor, and the ejector. Each contact leaves tiny scratches, dents, and impressions that are as unique as human DNA. Baltimore adjusted his microscope, examining the striations and impressions on both pieces of brass. The lab fell silent as he worked, comparing patterns that told stories of violence. Under magnification, the surfaces revealed their secrets. Tiny scratches created when each shell exploded from the firing chamber. After careful analysis, Baltimore delivered his conclusion. The impressions matched identically. Both shells had been fired from the same weapon, Ron Harshman's missing gun. Think about what that means. 15 years after being buried in Pennsylvania soil, a brass shell casing had preserved enough evidence to connect Ron Harshman to Melvin Snyder's ending. The microscopic world had spoken where the visible world remained silent. In March 2000, 15 years after Melvin vanished, prosecutors charged Ronald West Harshman with first-degree ending of life. They also charged Joanne Snyder Hall as a co-conspirator, alleging she'd helped Ron by telling him when Melvin would be alone. The theory was devastating. Joanne had provided Ron with a schedule. She'd told him Melvin would be in the barn between 6:30 and 7 a.m. on May 25th, feeding the horses, probably without his gun for self-defense. She'd essentially given Ron the blueprint for the perfect ambush. Whether Joanne conspired willingly or unknowingly helped orchestrate her husband's ending would remain buried in her conscience. The charges against her were eventually dropped right before her trial. A judge ruled she was an unwitting participant, suggesting she'd been manipulated rather than actively conspiring. But Joanne testified against Ron at his trial, and her testimony was explosive. She claimed she'd known about Ron's plan. She admitted she'd told him when Melvin would be alone. Most shockingly, she testified that she'd gone to Ron's house the next day and seen Melvin's body lying on the basement floor. If that testimony was true, it meant Joanne knew exactly what happened to her husband and said nothing for 15 years. The weight of that secret must have been crushing. The trial began in July 2001, 16 years after Melvin vanished. The prosecution built their case entirely on circumstantial evidence. But the circumstances formed an unbreakable chain. Ron's documented rage after the affair, his previous attempt to end Melvin, the shooting incident in 1984, his purchase of a .25 caliber pistol right after his divorce, the matching shell casings witness sightings of his truck near the Snyder property, his inability to produce the gun he claimed to own. 3 former cellmates who testified Ron had confessed the ending to them. The defense argued the evidence was purely circumstantial. They suggested investigators were targeting Ron because he was an easy suspect. They pointed out that no body had been found, no weapon had been recovered, and no witnesses saw the actual ending. But the jury saw through the smokescreen. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned with their verdict on July 2001. Guilty of first-degree ending of life. The judge sentenced Ron Harshman to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Justice had finally been served, or so everyone thought. Here's where the story takes a shocking turn that will make your blood boil. Ron Harshman sat in prison for 12 years. Then in 2012, one of the jailhouse witnesses who testified against him recanted his story. He claimed he'd lied about Ron confessing. Another witness recanted. Then a third. Ron's defense team filed appeals, arguing that prosecutors had made secret deals with these jailhouse informants, offering them help with parole in exchange for their testimony against Ron. This violated Ron's constitutional rights under Brady v. Maryland, which requires prosecutors to disclose any deals made with witnesses. In 2018, 33 years after Melvin vanished, a federal judge overturned Ron Harshman's conviction. The judge ruled that the prosecution had failed to disclose material evidence about deals with witnesses. Ron deserved a new trial. The Franklin County District Attorney faced a difficult choice: retry Ron Harshman 33 years after the offense with witnesses who are now recanting, or offer a plea deal. In 2019, Ron Harshman pleaded no contest to third-degree ending of life, Pennsylvania's equivalent of voluntary manslaughter. Cumberland County Court of Common Pleas Judge Edward Guido sentenced him to 10 to 20 years in prison with credit for time already served. By that point, Ron had already served 18 years. With credit for time served and good behavior, he was eligible for immediate release. Today in 2025, Ronald West Harshman is a free man. He has a presence on social media. He walks around as if he never ended anyone's life. The man who almost certainly eliminated Melvin Snyder out of jealous rage, who disposed of a body so thoroughly it was never found, who left a widow and family without closure for 40 years, got to walk free. Joanne Snyder Hall has kept out of the public eye. Teresa Harshman, who remarried and became Teresa Harshman Young, has also stayed away from the spotlight. Both women presumably learned their lesson about square dancing and switching partners. Melvin Snyder's body has never been found, not in 40 years of searching. Ron never revealed where he put Melvin's remains. As part of his plea deal, he wasn't required to. So Melvin lies somewhere in the Pennsylvania countryside he loved, in an unmarked grave that only his ending knows. The Snyder family never got closure. They never got to bury Melvin properly. They never got to say goodbye. And the man who took that from them is free. The Melvin Snyder case is one of the most frustrating in forensic history. It's amazing Ron Harshman was convicted in the first place, given the circumstantial nature of the evidence. No body, no weapon, no witnesses to the actual offense. Just those 2 matching shell casings and a web of suspicious circumstances. That metal detector search in 1999 was a stroke of genius by prosecutor Jack Nelson. Without that buried shell casing, Ron Harshman would never have faced trial. The odds of finding a single .25 caliber casing in hundreds of acres of farmland, buried an inch underground for 15 years, were astronomical. But Don Hinks and his team did it. They found the evidence that cracked the case wide open. The forensic analysis was flawless. Those microscopic striations on the brass casings told a story that couldn't be disputed. Both shells had been fired from the same weapon, Ron's missing gun. The science was solid. But science can't overcome a legal system where jailhouse informants can recant their testimony decades later. Where prosecutors who make essentially undisclosed deals with witnesses can torpedo an entire case. Where a convicted ending can walk free on a technicality after 18 years. Think about Ron Harshman's life now. He's in his 70s, living somewhere in Pennsylvania or Maryland. Probably telling anyone who'll listen that he was wrongly convicted. That he pleaded no contest just to get out of prison, not because he was guilty. That Melvin ran off somewhere and started a new life. But we know the truth. The evidence doesn't lie. Those shell casings don't lie. The timing doesn't lie. The motive doesn't lie. Ron Harshman ended Melvin Snyder on May 25, 1985, exactly 1 year after Melvin ran off with Ron's wife. He planned it meticulously. He executed it coldly. He disposed of the body so thoroughly that it's never been found. And he almost got away with it completely. For 16 years, he thought he had gotten away with it. Then a metal detector found a shell casing buried in his backyard, and his perfect crime started unraveling. He spent 18 years in prison before legal technicalities set him free. Justice in this case came and went. It arrived in 2001 when a jury convicted Ron Harshman. It departed in 2019 when he walked out of prison a free man. Melvin Snyder never got justice. His family never got closure. And Ron Harshman never had to reveal where he buried the body. The Pennsylvania countryside holds Melvin's secret grave. Somewhere out there, maybe in those orange groves near his farm, maybe in Ron's former property, maybe somewhere neither investigators nor family members would ever think to look. Melvin Snyder's remains lie waiting to be found. But after 40 years, that discovery seems less and less likely. The man who knows where Melvin is buried has no incentive to tell. He's free. He's old. He's outlived the consequences of his actions. Sometimes justice moves with the slowness of erosion, wearing down lies grain by grain. But sometimes justice gets tired. Sometimes it gives up. Sometimes ending gets to walk free while their victims stay buried in unmarked graves. The shell casing waited 15 years underground to tell its story. It spoke the truth through microscopic scratches on brass. But in the end, the truth wasn't enough. That's the harsh reality of the Melvin Snyder case. The evidence solved the ending. The science proved the guilt. The jury delivered the verdict. But the legal system, with all its technicalities and loopholes and appellate courts, let the ending walk free. And Melvin Snyder? He's still out there somewhere, under Pennsylvania soil, waiting for someone to find him and bring him home.